Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelenskyy has hailed the start of talks on his country's accession to the European Union. He says Europe cannot be complete without Ukraine as a member. Kyiv will not be able to join the bloc until after the war with Russia is over, and the talks are expected to last many years.
Applying for EU membership, one of the first moves Ukraine made after Russia launched its full-scale invasion back in February 2022. A move that the country sees as a path to better living conditions and more security. The EU agreed to start the process, but made it clear Ukraine would need to make some changes before taking the next steps. Any country joining the EU has to meet its high standards, including on rule of law, human rights and a competitive market economy. Since then, Ukraine has been busy with its EU homework, pushing forward reforms to curb corruption and decrease oligarchs' influence, all while fighting off Russian aggression. That's earned the country praise from the EU's executive.
You have made great strides, much greater than anyone expected from a country at war. You are undergoing deep reforms while fighting a full-scale war. And the goal is truly within reach.
Now that the EU has approved Ukraine's reforms, accession talks can begin. But they'll be heavy on technical detail. Negotiations will mean going through every chapter of the EU rulebook, all 35 of them, and making sure that Ukraine's laws align. That includes over policy areas such as energy, taxation and justice. The 27 current EU members will have many more opportunities to approve or block Ukraine's progress. And joining this club could take years or even decades. All that means Ukraine's journey to EU membership could still be a long one.
Sir Michael Leigh is a former chief negotiator for EU enlargement at the European Commission. Now he's academic director at the Johns Hopkins University's School of Advanced International Studies. Welcome to the show. It's a pleasure to have you on. We heard it there, a long road ahead for Ukraine. What time frame do you envision for Kyiv's accession to the EU?
You know, the EU always says nothing is agreed until everything is agreed. And the EU is extremely reluctant to set a date as a target. For myself, I think that a decade is the minimum this process could take, and it may well be longer.
Mm-hmm. Can Ukraine become a member even if the Russian war of aggression hasn't ended?
It's very hard to envisage a country in a state of war becoming a member of the European Union. You know, the European Union is very often said to be a peace project, and I really don't see a country actively involved in an ongoing war becoming an EU member.
But don't time and circumstances demand quick results here in a way? Because depending on how the war goes, the candidate country may cease to exist in the future. Couldn't that precisely be a reason for the annexation process to be sped up?
Look, there's a contradiction here because the EU is ready to open these negotiations for geopolitical reasons. It wants to express solidarity and support for Ukraine and to send a clear message to Putin that we don't accept any notion of a Russian sphere of influence, including Ukraine. That said, the EU is a community of law, and any country joining the EU must be in a position to implement the laws of the European Union. And frankly, all the existing candidates, including Ukraine, are still far away from that.
So the same strict criteria should be applied to Ukraine as to all the other candidates?
There's no quick fix, and I think all the EU spokespeople have been clear about that.
Do you expect certain EU members to slow down the process? Hungary, for example, has taken over the EU Council presidency in July, and the government in Budapest doesn't seem to be a huge fan of Ukraine's accession.
That's right. Hungary is in favor of enlargement, with like-minded countries run by illiberal elites, countries like Serbia, for example. But Hungary is leaning towards Moscow. And obviously, Moscow is not favorable to Ukraine joining the European Union. And therefore, we can expect Hungary to drag its heels and probably to put obstacles in the way of any detailed negotiations over the next 6 months.
Now, as the former chief negotiator for precisely these kinds of processes, how would you win over a reluctant EU member like Hungary?
You know, the EU moves forward mainly through package deals in which there's something for everybody. With 27 member states, there really has to be a consensus that every country can recognize as being in its interests. And I expect this to be the case as we go forward with the enlargement process as well. Hungary also expects various benefits from the European Union. And moving forward, there'll be plenty of scope for negotiation.
Now, besides the war that is being fought on Ukrainian territory, where do you see the major stepping stones on Ukraine's way to the EU?
I really must underline that we're not talking here only about Ukraine. Today, the decision was made, and actually we have open negotiations with Ukraine and Moldova, and there are ongoing negotiations with countries in the Balkans like Serbia and Montenegro. So this is a wider, and we have further candidates for membership in the Western Balkans, for example. So this is a wider process than Ukraine alone. The EU has decided to begin negotiations by looking at issues related to the rule of law, to be sure that the partner country really is committed to democracy, the rule of law, the protection of human rights, an independent judicial system, for example, before going any further with more detailed technical talks. So the talks will begin with fundamental issues such as these.
That was Sir Michael Leigh, former chief negotiator for EU enlargement. Thank you so much for your time and all those insights.
Thank you.